Good evening and welcome. My name is Jade Thorne and I am a director of Portrush Heritage Group. We welcome you all, whether watching from here, near or far, and thank you for your attendance. We would appreciate if our Zoom audience could please leave their cameras switched off and their sound muted. We're delighted to have you here with us this evening and we thank you all very much for your support. 2024 marks the 10th anniversary, our 10th anniversary, and looking at the 2014 speakers, you can see that we had a very impressive opening night. We have come a long way in the past decade and we look forward to continued success. Last year we topped the 200 member mark and so far this year we have 150 paid up members. So please invite your friends and your neighbours to join Portrush Heritage Group. As Canon John used to say, it's the best value in Portrush. I'd like to extend a very special welcome to our speakers this evening, Sarah Calvin, Grainne Milner-McLoone and Joe Mahon. Sarah and Grainne will take us on a journey through the life and songs of Sam Henry, a Coleraine Folklorist, photographer, pioneer radio broadcaster and councillor. Joe is very much part of our family as he comes into our living rooms on wet winter nights and makes us all smile and relax. Joe, who will be our first speaker, is going to take a look at some of the stories he has encountered while filming Mahon's Way. I'd also like to mention and welcome the Mahon's Way class of 2023, our superstars from the show, Kate Murphy, Hugh McGrattan, Maurice McAleese, Dr. Peter Wilson, John Murr and John McNally, all of whom you've seen here this evening. So this evening we extend to Joe, the Mahon's Way team and the class of 2023 our sincere thanks for their contribution to the promotion of our heritage through the two Mahon's Way Portrush programmes. Thank you very much. Now, before introducing our first speaker, we would like to set the scene by running this short GeoWood NI video of the top 10 places to visit and photograph on the Causeway Coast. Kenneth Wood and George Pafilis have helped us through the winter with their beautifully photographed videos and informative chat. Thank you, Kenneth and George.
If you were to come to Northern Ireland, which area would be the best to photograph and to visit?
Well, in our opinion, the most scenic part of Northern Ireland is the Causeway Coast. Google tells us that the Causeway Coast runs from Belfast all the way to Derry, Londonderry. And of course, whatever Google says is true. But we're going to focus on the most popular part of the Causeway Coast, from downhill all the way to Ballycastle.
So, which are the top 10 places to photograph and actually visit in the Causeway Coast of Northern Ireland?
Ballycastle, the town that's cozier than a sheep in a woolly sweater and more charming than a leprechaun with a pot of gold. And let's not forget about the locals. They've got the friendliest smiles this side of the rainbow. Trying to photograph them is like trying to capture the essence of hospitality in pixels. It's impossible. Did I mention about the fish and chips that are the best in the world? Thank you, Angela.
Portrush, and Ken, I think that Portrush is one of the most underrated places in the whole of the Causeway Coast. What do you think?
There's no argument for me, George. This would be at the top of my list of places to visit and photograph on the Causeway Coast. It's just such a splendid place, and it's not crowded very often, which is even better for photography. Brilliant walk along towards Runkerry here. Again, absolutely wonderful. No argument at all. This for me is right up there at the top.
I can't agree with you more. It definitely deserves to be on the top 10.
Well, we couldn't miss off Castle Rock.
Lovely walk along the strand here to the bar mouth. On a day like today where it's a bit windy, you get incredible waves breaking over the bar mouth there. Equally down there is Lawson's Jetty, where we did a video on some time ago. Really windy today. So we couldn't really leave out the Dark Hedges. It's one of the most spectacular places and one of the most popular. This avenue of beech trees dates back to 1775. Sadly today, out of the 150 trees that were originally there, there are only around 80 remaining. If you do go there to take photographs, early morning is by far the best time. That's before the crowds arrive. And if you're lucky, you might even get a bit of mist around those trees. It really does add to the ethereal, sort of haunting image that you have of them. Yeah, why? Because it's supposed to have its own ghost, the Grey Lady. Have you got a head for heights? Now, there's been a rope bridge here for centuries, and it is much, much safer these days. Initially, there was just one rail on one side to cross. Heaven knows how people did that. If you do cross it, don't look down, look straight ahead. Photography wise, it lends itself to lots of different images, but again, night photography works ever so well here, as this time lapse certainly shows.
Well, it's a 1 mile peninsula sticking out into the Atlantic Ocean with two amazing beaches, the East Strand and the West Strand. Portrush has a lot to offer. Endless opportunities for photography and relaxation. What else would you want?
So we're now at the Herring Pond in Port Stewart. Have a look at these waves behind. Absolutely phenomenal. It's a wonderful place for photography. It's also a place that people swim most days. Why it's called the Herring Pond, I've no idea. If you know, let us know in the comments below. We're going to take a slow shutter speed now, and we're going to calm these waves behind and turn it into that sort of ethereal look. So if that works, here it is.
Musselden Temple. This stoic round structure, standing alone with its columns proudly facing the sea, seems to be playing a centuries-old game of chicken with Mother Nature. How close can I get to the edge before I take a swim? It seems to ponder. Inside, it's easy to imagine it was once a hotspot for philosophers and poets. To be or not to be, that close to a cliff edge. Nowadays, it's likely whispering to the sea. If I had a dime for every time someone said, "Wow, what a view," I'd have enough to buy myself a much safer location. Downhill Castle. Its ruins, with their crumbling walls and ivy-clad arches, are a romantic testament to the passage of time. They stand proudly against the backdrop of the local countryside, offering breathtaking views of the surrounding sea and hills.
This is the sandy port at Ballantoy. It is one of my most favourite places of all. As you stand here and you look out towards Rathlin Island, Sheep Island and Port Campbell with Scotland behind, it is absolutely splendid for photography. Northern lights here are out of this world on a good clear night. If I had £1 for every time I photographed down here, I'd be quite rich. And I ask you, how sweet is this? Just look behind me here, see the pink in the sky, the foreglow, the sun's rising over there at Gallows Hill and Dunluce Castle behind me being lit up. Early morning and not another soul about. It's absolutely splendid. How could we miss out the Giant's Causeway, the #1 place to visit along the Causeway coast in Northern Ireland? Such a spectacular place, George. What do you think?
Well, it had to be the #1 place on the Causeway Coast of Northern Ireland. It's one of the most spectacular places for visiting and photography.
Standing on these stones beneath a starry sky, photographing the northern lights off there is an unbelievable experience.
So of course scientists tell us that this place was created by a geological event that happened millions of years ago. But we all know that the true story is that it was created by a giant called Finn McCool, who after a few drinks had a little bit of DIY landscaping and created this place.
Yeah. Don't miss this place off your itinerary when you come to visit Northern Ireland and take photographs here. You won't be disappointed.
So these are our top 10 places along the Causeway Coast of Northern Ireland. Let us know in the comments below if you agree with us. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and don't forget to press the bell icon on your notifications so you know exactly when we have our next video. Thank you very much for watching and we'll see you next time.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Kenneth and George, for sharing that with us. I have a camera roll full of photos in there and not one of them that looks as good as any of those, so well done. Joe Mahon, our first speaker, needs very little introduction. Before TV, he was a teacher of history and English in Derry, Londonderry. He was then with Radio Foyle. And then in 1996, he started his own production company, Westway Film Productions, which is responsible for the current very popular TV series, Mahon's Way. Joe, after your October 22 visit, we lived in hope and prayer for a visit by Mahon's Way to the port. You can imagine how delighted we were when we heard that we were not getting one, but 2 programmes about the town's heritage. The final programmes were beyond expectation in terms of photography and content. They got our message to a much wider audience than we could ever hope to. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Joe Mahon.
Thank you very much, Jade, for the introduction. And I don't know what you're expecting in terms of photography from our 2 programs on Mahon's Way, but when you just have witnessed what George and Kenneth have produced, I mean, the bar was set extremely high, and well, you saw yourself, the quality of what they produce is just absolutely stunning. And if I had access to those pictures week after week, everybody, our program would be going worldwide, I can guarantee you. So well done to George and to Kenneth. I've seen your stuff frequently. You see your stuff, your wonderful pictures. John McNally, of course, is forever spreading it on all over the world. And again, in my email boxes, nearly always got a picture from George and from Ken. And I've always admired them, always admired the sheer professionalism, the artistry of it all. But the video that we've just seen, when somehow takes it to a completely new level. Don't know if you agree with me, because the two men are there themselves, because they're actually telling you about the place. And that to me is so much more effective, to hear the human voices behind the pictures, those lovely accents that they both have. Nowhere near Portrush, I think, in the first instance, but it makes the pictures become much more meaningful. And I think that is if there is a secret to making TV programs, is that it's really when you get to the human dimension of enjoying and of understanding both the scenery and the history of that scenery, that it really is the most effective form of communication. And I think that's the kind of stuff that engages an audience far, far more. Talking of that audience, I mean, the pictures that we brought to you from Portrush, and the whole series, in fact, had its probably as good an audience ratings as any series we've ever done. Over the course of 12 weeks, I think we amassed a live viewership. Now, I mean by live viewership is not just people who are still alive watching the program. I mean people who actually are watching it as it is being broadcast, not afterwards having watched a recording or UTV player or whatever. 1.5 million people over a series of 12 in our small place. And that's only within Northern Ireland, and that's only, as I say, live viewership. So it was as good as ever it has been, which is really gratifying for us, because we've been making programs of this type, of this nature for the past 30 years. And you would think by this stage, well, as has been said to me many years ago, surely you've scraped the bottom of the barrel by now. Surely you've been everywhere and talked to anybody of any interest, and you've been to any places worth looking at, and so on. And my constant refrain whenever confronted with that kind of attitude, which is less common, I have to say, is that history is endless. Stay small, dig deep, and look each time at a place with fresh eyes. Look at it with a fresh perspective and a vantage point, and you will be endlessly fascinated and interested by what you uncover. And that's kind of what we did when we came to Portrush. We were blessed, thrice blessed, in terms of, we picked good days, we picked good weather, apart from the one that I took Kate Murphy up to Mahon Cross and nearly blew her off it. Generally speaking, the weather was wonderful. You have such marvelous natural assets in the North Coast, as Ken and George have just been demonstrating. I mean, it is a stunningly beautiful place bequeathed to you by nature. But on top of that, you have built a town which is based on the pleasure principle. Let's be honest. Why was Portrush built in the main in the 19th century and the 20th century? So that people could enjoy it, so that people would have a good time here. So what other principle, could you use and not produce a place that it is beautiful to look at? It enhances the natural scenery that you have. And of course, the people, there's a spirit amongst people here who want to see you having fun, who want to see you enjoying themselves, because that is tied up with their livelihoods as well. So it's a perfect combination. And then we had the actual individuals. Could you get them up, Mervyn, again? Going back the ways. Yes, look at them, how handsome they are there. I managed to get me Ned beside each one of them as well. Most of you are here tonight, folks, I think. There's a few absentees. Andy is probably out surfing somewhere as we speak. That's Andy and Andy Hill in the middle. So I'm indebted to the people who appeared on those two programmes. Who really, in a sense, and it takes a bit of courage to do that, to stick your neck out and put your mouth where your money is, so to speak, and be on our programme and trust us to make you turn out as you would wish to be seen and heard. And well, it was so easy. We had great communicators. Starting from Kate Murphy, Maurice McAleese, John McNally himself, Hugh sitting down here, Jimmy Grattan, Andy Hill in the middle, and John Moore, Dr. Peter Wilson down here, and Aaron Callan up at Ballywillan Presbyterian Church. So I mean, if you had to go out and with a full list of knowledge of everybody who lived in the place and pick, who are the 8 best communicators we could possibly get for these programs for this particular purpose, you couldn't have picked a better 8. It's as simple as that. I'm particularly grateful to, obviously, John McNally, who is the most stunningly efficient, almost irritatingly efficient chairperson I have ever come across. I mean this now. I mean nothing but admiration for the work that John does for the Portrush Heritage Group. It's it's breathtaking. He could do my job and 10 others at the same time. For just keeping the enthusiasm alive, and for keeping and for the imagination that he also applies to these events and to the Heritage Group, generally speaking. Also, the man above the right of there, John Moore. John has been, apart from giving this invaluable contribution about the history of the harbour in Portrush, going back many centuries. He is also, as most of you probably know, an avid collector of old photographs and memorabilia, posters, etc. And he is one of the most generous people I have ever come across with regards to sharing these. Because normally when you get these kind of collectors, they're guarded kind of people. You know, you'll be looking at mine, and unless you pay me a huge amount of money. John is so generous. He has given free access to all of his stuff. And that is part of the reason why I was so delighted to come back to this part of the world. Do you count Bushmills as this part of the world? Do you? Yeah. Because we've only recently, in the last month anyway, we've made a film in Bushmills, and there were obviously so many overlaps to Portrush that again, John's treasury of photographs came into play. Mervyn, could you maybe put up the next, can you put the three of them together, or do they all have to be? No, put the next one up for me first. There's another one beyond those two. Yeah, look at that one there. This is one of John's, and it's, I was talking to John about this earlier on. That is the opening day. I'm not sure the actual months, but I think it's 1883 of the Portrush Bushmills Causeway hydroelectric tramway. That's the very first day that it was launched. Launched in 1883. It could have been going 2 years earlier, apparently, but I think that the Trail brothers had a bit of an argument with the McNaughtons over the water rights, and the water from the River Bush was required to produce the electricity in the first place. But this is an interesting photograph, and you need, again, a person like John to interpret it for you and to see what's actually going on. I've happily used it in the photograph about Bushmills, and it's an historic photograph in its own right. And he's even able to tell me who all of these identical looking guys in top hats actually are. And the one in the center, the tall man in the center, known as the Red Earl, is Earl Spencer. You know, this was the very first, or the longest, it's the first in the UK hydroelectric steam tramway or train or whatever. And it's the longest, I think, in Europe at the time when it was actually first got going. But this was this was new new science, new technology applied in industry. This was really something very special, and it was something that the other people who were involved in it were very, very aware of. I should say that the other that's Earl Spencer in the middle. The man in the front at the controls, right? And John Moore's able to tell me he didn't actually drive it. You know, that was only posed for the foot. While you two girls around there taking that photographs of that time, stand up there. This is William Trail. This is William Trail, who's really the man who really should be up there alongside some of the great inventors of the 20th century, or even the 19th century. So William Trail, I think it came from Ballylock House, which is near Bushmills, near the river at Bushmills, and they got the idea. He and his brother, William, you can go back, if you don't mind, Mervyn, now to the previous two photographs. Could you put them both up together? No? Mervyn, that's... I've been praising his efficiency here. Doesn't matter. No, that's fine. I'm only kidding. Right. So William Trail. There's actually a portrait of him as well, where he looks slightly less forbidding in the waiting room of the railway, of the tramway station down at the Causeway. So William Trail should be one of the, as I say, lauded as one of the great inventors of all time. And he actually, the company that they established was invested in very heavily by some of the other great scientists, industrialists of the day. I think Lord Kelvin, William Thomson, was a major investor in that, as was Dr. Siemens, you know, the Siemens, the German family firm of engineers and so on. So these were the top guys in the world of engineering and science at the time. And this was a major event, not just for Portrush, not just for the North Coast, but for the world. It's as simple as that. And the guys were so confident of the importance of this thing that they had no hesitation in inviting the Queen Victoria, to come and actually do the opening. So Queen Victoria, as I said, I think somewhere else, did a bit of a Dr. Johnson on it. You know, it would be worth doing it, but not worth going to do it. So she sent Earl Spencer instead. Nonetheless, it's significant. He was the Lord Lieutenant, the Queen's representative in Ireland. So it gives you some idea of the importance of that particular event. And of course, the heritage tramway that they have now is recreation on a smaller scale of what that was. But nonetheless, it's a wonderful idea to get something of that nature back up and running again as a tourist attraction. And it was designed originally not merely as a tourist attraction. It was designed to exploit some of the mineral wealth of the area as well. But it ended up being essentially famous in its own right as a tourist attraction. And we took the route, they very kindly provided for our crew, we were the only passengers, the route from the causeway back down to Bushmills, across beautiful Runcarry Beach, and follow some of the places there that were in George and Kenneth's film. So, and that photograph that John Moore gave me, along with a lot of others, I have to say, captures that moment and the importance of that moment back in history, back in the 1880s. I'm not going to dwell too much on Bushmills because it wouldn't be fair, because I didn't tell everybody what was in the Portrush programs before they went out, even though they wanted to know. But it is. I was impressed by a whole lot of things about Bushmills, but the story, it's quite a poignant story, obviously. I mean, it's a bit to do with the First World War. I mean, Bushmills is bristling with monuments and statues for a small village of its size. Some of them are modern sculptures and so on. But of course, the War Memorial, which was done by I forget his name now, but there was a famous sculptor who produced the actual statue for the War Memorial in Bushmills. And then, of course, it's related to the statue of Robert Quigg, Rifleman Robert Quigg, sergeant eventually, I think. He was a hero of the First World War and of the Somme. He himself survived until, I think, 1955, when he would have been quite an elderly man. But he was the recipient of the Victoria Cross, as you know, and he was genuine hero, because his commanding officer went missing on the very first day of the Battle of the Somme, which was just a slaughterhouse for so many people from this part of the world. So his commanding officer went missing. He was his Batman, and he had promised his mother that he would look after him and bring him back safe. You know, as you make these rash promises before you go off to battle. And so when he went missing on the first day, and that mayhem it must have been, and just that carnage in that field, he went into no man's land under heavy fire, machine gun fire, to look for him. An extraordinary piece of heroism. He didn't find him. But every time he went out, and he went out on 7 different occasions, each time he brought back a wounded comrade that wasn't, it's not you, but I'll take you back anyway, kind of attitude. So he saved the lives of 7 other comrades, and that's why he got the Victoria Cross. Probably not best pleased with himself at the end of all of that effort, because he didn't get the man that he set out to get. And somebody said to him afterwards, probably many years afterwards, you went out there under all that machine gun fire with so much death all around you, Robert, were you not scared? Were you not afraid? And he said to have replied, I was terrified, but I was far more terrified of going back to his mother and telling her that I hadn't got her, I'd lost her son. His mother on this occasion was Lady Edith McNaughton, and she was the one you can imagine what that must have been like in 1921, you know, just a few years later, who unveiled the statue at the memorial. And so that was a particularly poignant moment for her, because she lost both of her sons at the Somme. You know, both of her remaining sons. She had another son, I think, who died in infancy, and these were the two sons left, and both of them were killed. One of them on the first day of the Battle of the Somme, and one a few months later. And here's an interesting historical thing about the McNaughtons. It's a cultural thing. They were, as you know, from Scotland originally. They were an Ulster Scots family. And in the year 1818, the line of the chieftains of McNaughtons in Scotland, in the original place was Dunderav, which they also named the place here after, that line died out. So the only available McNaughtons, so to speak, to hold the chieftainship of Clan McNaughton were the ones who lived here in North Antrim. And in 1818, the first Scottish chieftain to live outside of Scotland was appointed. I forget his first name again. It's Sir Edward McNaughton, I think. They were all named very similarly. And the chieftain, I think he was the, I'm not quite sure, 19th chieftain or something like that, because they could trace this back hundreds and hundreds of years, how many chieftains there actually were. When Lady McNaughton's son died, and the first son died in the Somme, he would have been I think, somebody will correct me if I get these wrong, I think he was the 25th chieftain. And he had only acquired that title a couple of years because his father had died, Lady McNaughton's husband, had died in 1914. So you can imagine that death must have been seemed like an old sort of family retainer at this stage, because her family were wiped out in a very short space of time. And the 26th chief of the McNaughtons was 21 years of age, which brings it home to a lot of families and how young some of those were. When he died, his younger brother became automatically the 26th chieftain of Clan McNaughton. And the 26th chieftain spent his entire chieftainship at the Battle of the Somme, because he never came back for it. And he was aged 19. So it's stories like that that bring, that's a particularly poignant story. There's hilarious stories about the First World War that you could put as well. I don't think it's appropriate to tell one now. But those kind of poignant stories bring it home at a human level, just what a kind of event it was. Now we have these formal statues, and unless you know the human story, or some of the human stories connected to them, they're far less meaningful to you. They're just monuments to the past. The past is still very much alive if you know where to look for it and where to find it. So, sorry, that's enough about Bush Builders. There's plenty of other things. It'll be another 7 or 8 months before you actually see the programme, by which time I hope I'm still around to see it myself, never mind all the people who are actually in it. Coming back to the programme we just done on Portrush, one of the people who was a major contributor to that, and he contributed much, much more than eventually ended up in the programme, was Dr. Peter Wilson, who's here tonight, Peter somewhere. And Peter is, there's way down at the back. If you want to know anything about geology or volcanology or anything like that, Peter's the very man to ask. He's also interested in crow's feet, but he fell off a few trees looking for them, didn't he? Not those crow's feet, but he'll let him explain that. But Peter, as I say, we talked about Portrush Rock with Peter, not the pink stuff, but the stuff that was just in dispute between the volcanologists and the Neptunists, and he cleared that up for us. This whole coastline, as we know, was largely as a result of, it looks like, as it is, including the causeway, a result of volcanic activity, which Peter will tell us, 60 million years or thereabouts is the last time. So you've been safe from volcanoes since that time. But there's that kind of notion of how history, that kind of history, millions and millions of years ago, how affects the present and how people relate to that kind of history and relate to nature and so on. These were thoughts that were crowding in on me after talking to Peter. And I wondered how many, or did volcanic activity cease altogether at that time? You go under the ground, it's still going on, I know all of that. But I can tell you for a fact, because I came across it in other places, how Irish history and particularly the history, well, of certain parts of Northern Ireland as well, were affected directly by volcanic activity. Not the volcanic activity that happened 60 million years ago, but the volcanic activity that's happened in the few hundred years since, and maybe still going on in the world as well. Because in the year 1693, I think it was, and again, Peter will know more about these things than I will, I think it was 1693, Mount Hekla in Iceland and Mount Sarua in Indonesia erupted. And you say, well, what's that got to do with us here? Well, what it had to do with us here is that it sent this cloud up into the sky of volcanic ash and all sorts of other stuff, and it clouded out the sun for an awful long time, for years, in fact. And the result of that over Northern Europe, and the result of that over Scotland in particularly, was to create the kind of climate conditions where it made it very, very difficult to grow anything. You had freezing cold winters, and you had very, very little sunshine in the growing seasons, which led to one of the worst famines ever we talk about Irish famines, Scottish famine in the 1690s. You've heard of the 7 ill years, perhaps, those of you who have any knowledge of Scottish history or Scottish ancestry. The 7 ill years were from 1693 to the end of the century. And during that time, depending on where you lived in Scotland, between 10% and 20% of the population died. And they died from either starvation or malnutrition, or they died from cold and disease. They died from lack of being able to look after themselves to farm the land. And that decade is very, very significant in terms of Ulster history, because after the plantation of Ulster, start of the early 1600s, people get some vague impression. Yes, we had waves of settlement from Scotland coming into Ulster, up to a certain point that you had over in the east of the province. But the ones that came into, for example, into Donegal, and perhaps in parts of Antrim and further west and so on, really didn't appear until the 1690s, when tens of thousands of Scots came over here as part of to settle here in this part of the world. Scottish people aren't stupid. They weren't going to leave a bad situation to come to a worse one. They would leave a worse situation to come to a better one. And that's what happened from the 1690s onwards. So the whole plantation really only took off properly because a lot of the people, the tens of thousands of people coming from Scotland in the 1690s and thereafter, were really escaping. They were famine refugees, if you like to say. I have that on the authority of Dr. Paddy Fitzgerald, who's who studied migration of that period in the Mellon Centre. So it's interesting that that was caused initially by volcanic activity. I think the last time I was up here, I talked about Blaine and Ard, the 1740s, whenever the Newry Canal was built. And that was built at the end of a massive famine as well. And that was yet another, caused by yet another volcano when I think Kamchatka, I think I've pronounced it properly, the Kamchatka Peninsula in eastern Russia, major volcanic explosion. And that created exactly the same kind of conditions we're talking about. And again, on the east and on the north, in Ireland, something like 20% of the population, especially infants, died during a long period. This is getting very depressing, isn't it? But I just wanted to say, these events in nature really had a huge impact. And you think about it, an enormous impact on the outcome of Irish and Ulster history thereafter, not to mention Scottish history, of course. and there's other instances I could name, but they're worth somebody's while, maybe mine, some states, to do a book or a program about just what were the effects on subsequent Irish history of volcanic activity elsewhere in the world, because it would make for quite interesting reading. Now, if we, I think we'll move on from volcanoes for a while, and move into this notion that I have of how that, if you like, those instances of dependence on nature and also being betrayed by nature, how that affected people's attitudes towards nature and towards the universe at large. I think that whenever the significance of the Newry Canal in 1742, when it opened, that really was the start, I think I said before, of the Industrial Revolution in Ireland. And from the Industrial Revolution in Ireland, our attitude, humankind attitude towards nature, was it was there to be exploited. It was there to be harnessed. It was there to be used. Because if you didn't harness it, if you didn't fight it, and this attitude still persists to the present day, then nature was quite capable of ruining you. Nature could send you volcanoes and floods and earthquakes. It's still doing it in parts of the world, right? And we're simply victims of all of that. And it changed the attitude. At the same time around that, so you had the Romantic movement in English literature, where people like Wordsworth and Coleridge thought that nature had a role to play in their moral development, but nature was benevolent towards them. If you only looked and communed with nature and took your lessons from nature, then that was part of your upbringing, that you would learn a great deal. It kind of ruined that, because people would say, you can't deal with nature on that level, because nature doesn't have a heart. Nature doesn't have a soul. Nature's not human. Nature doesn't feel the same things we feel. Nature will wipe you out at a moment's notice. Yes, but when you come forward into the 21st century, the 20th century, here we are now facing our own crisis, and partly at least, it has been caused by ourselves, not by volcanoes this time, but because of heating up the planet with our industrial revolution activity. And people are saying, our role is still the same. It's to control nature. It is to harness nature for the benefit of humankind. I'm not really arguing about that. And they say, nature doesn't have a heart. Nature doesn't have a soul. Nature doesn't have, any kind of human attributes whatsoever. It is pitiless. But that is to misunderstand, I think, our human relationship to nature. That is to have us outside of nature, looking in as an alien kind of force or something like that. I'm going to briefly go back to what I said about George and Kenneth's film at the start of this. They were showing us beautiful photographs, northern lights, gorgeous skies and gorgeous scenery in all weathers and all seasons. And the thing that made it human, the thing that made it, if you like, more accessible to us, were George and Kenneth themselves appearing in it and talking about it. So I would like to put our relationship to nature a slightly different way. No, nature, don't be expecting things of nature that she's not capable of giving us. But nature does, I put it to us all. Nature does have a heart, and nature does have a soul. Nature can feel pity, and nature also has a brain, because that heart and soul is humankind. We are part and parcel of nature. We're not separated from it at all. We are part of it. We are part of the universe, and every single element is part of the universe, exactly the same as us. So if anything's going to be done about that, we supply the heart, the soul, the conscience, and the pity, if that's what's required. Above all, it requires the brains. So that's the kind of thoughts. You thought I was enjoying myself going through the countryside, didn't you? This kind of thoughts. Always trying to say, well, what relationship do these people have with nature? Our relationship is growing and growing and growing. Every generation we're getting closer back again to a full, proper understanding and respect of nature. and our role in it. And I think all that we try to do is a contribution to that. And understanding the past and understanding history is also part of that. I'm going to finish off, probably should have finished off quite a while ago, with just a bit on a brighter note, let me put it that way. And you're about to hear Susan, and you're about to hear Grainne provide you with a lot of information and some of the sounds of Sam Henry collection. And I have a connection here as well because for Susan, like John Moore has been supplying me with pictures and also information and photographs from the treasury of the Causeway Museum. And Grainne has put a lot of those Sam Henry collection songs to music, and I was very pleased to be at the launch of her CD in the Riverside Theatre not that long ago, Grainne, where she sang beautifully, and some of those songs that you played for us, and she is certainly worth hearing. But Grainne and I go back even further than that, because she was in a previous series with me. I have to let you into a secret. Grainne and I are related, right? Somewhat, not that distantly, really. Grainne, I have to say that she recently lost her dad, which very, very sadly. Professor Milner-McLoone from the university, Professor of Media Studies. Many would say he's the inventor of media studies in a lot of respects, academically. And Martin and I were teenage friends. We were cousins as well, but we went to school together, and we went to college together. We shared flats in Dublin, many flats in Dublin. We'll draw a discreet veil over that period of time. But so I mean, many years later, he was doing what he was doing, Professor of Media Studies, and I was actually doing what I was doing as well. So it was wonderful to meet Grainne. And we met on a slightly different kind of family thing, as it were, because my wife is from Mahara. Her grandfather was Hugh Cassidy, long dead in the 1940s. But he was locally known as the poet, Mr. Cassidy the poet. He wrote a lot of songs and poetry, and he was a correspondent. You can maybe say more about this with Sam Henry. Am I stealing your thunder now, saying all this thing? No. He and Sam Henry were correspondents. Sam Henry came down and actually found his house, which was more than we could do at the time we went to Phil, way up on the hill in Fallalay. So anyway, that's where we first met, and Grainne was able to tell me about her project and her PhD that she's doing at the present time, and also to sing the songs with Fallalay that he wrote. So that is a much pleasanter note for me to end up, and so I'm looking forward to hearing you again. And right, you'd be sorry you asked me to come back again and cheer you all up. Anyway, you've been very, very patient listening to me. I'm now delighted to be able to hand over to a much pleasanter picture after I leave. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joe. That was fantastic. You've given probably a better introduction than I'm going to now for the ladies, but I'll try my best. So our second subject this evening embraces word and song. And I just want to get it in the right order. Sarah's providing the word and Grainne's providing the song. Sarah Calvin is the Museum Services Development Manager for Causeway Coast and Glens Museum Services. In late 2009, she took up the post of Collections Access Officer for Coleraine Museum with Coleraine Borough Council. And in 2017, Sarah's job role changed to Museum Officer, where she looked after Ballycastle Museum and its collection, as well as Colerane's collection. In April 22, she commenced her new role as the Museum Services Development Manager. Congratulations. It was early in 2010, right at the start of Sarah's career in the museum service, that the Sam Henry collection was generously donated by the Craig family to Coleraine Museum. Sarah will introduce Sam and his collection and talk about what the museum services has done with the collection since 2010. Grainne is a folk singer and songwriter from Port Stewart, currently completing a PhD on the Sam Henry Irish Folk Song Collection. Grainne holds a BA and MA in music from Newcastle University, specialising in both performance and Irish cultural music studies. Through her work, Grainne aims to combine fields of research and creative practice, which has led to the creation of her first official album, The Songs of Sam Henry, which was launched on July the 8th, 22 at the Riverside Theatre in Coleraine, introduced by Mr. Joe Mahon. So Grainne will be singing songs from her album, The Songs of Sam Henry. So over to you, ladies. Thank you.
So thank you for inviting myself and for inviting Grainne along tonight to talk about the Sam Henry collection. When I was pulling my slides together, I actually realised I haven't done a physical talk on Sam Henry since 2019, and I was heavily pregnant at the time, so I could barely breathe, let alone talk. So it's really lovely to be here in Portrush tonight to talk about Sam again. I shouldn't say this, but it is most definitely one of my favourite collections that we have in the museum service. And hopefully when I finish talking, you'll kind of understand why it is one of my favourite collections. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to go right back. As Jade said there, I started working with Coleraine Borough Council in 2009 with Coleraine Museum, and Gordon Craig rang me in January 2010 and started to talk about Sam Henry and his collection. Now, I had never heard of Sam. I did a very quick Google search to see what I could find out, and I still really wasn't much wiser, but whenever I went to Gordon's house, he took me into his dining room, and it was full of these boxes full of all this kind of material. There was letters, there was postcards, there was his diaries, there was photographs. It was fantastic. I was so pleased to see all this stuff. And the best thing about it was it all connected. So if you picked up a letter, you would then find a photograph of that person, or you would find a song that they donated, or you would find something that told you a more of a complete story. So whenever you were talking about the First World War there, it reminded me of one thing, and this is an example in the collection. So there's not a lot of objects in the collection. So I knew we had his binoculars, his field glasses. It was 2014 and we were looking for items for our First World War exhibition. So I knew we had these binoculars. I started to find these letters that were headed the Sir Lady Robert Field Glasses Fund. So Sam had a letter from about 2014. 2018, there's other letters asking for the return of these field glasses, and it gives a number. And this number was T164. So I was like, no way could these have gone off to the First World War and come back. Went down to the store, found binoculars, and there was a little metal plaque with this T164. And for me, I suppose that's the power of objects and artifacts. So you're holding those glasses thinking, who else has held these? What have they seen through these? These have been to the First World War and came back again, and Sam's used them. He was a member of the Route Naturalist Field Club, the Belfast Naturalist Field Club. So I just thought they were connected to his bird watching, his interest in birds, but it just shows you how much more, an object can give and tell you. So what I also liked about the collection, whenever I first saw this, if you want to go to the next slide, just a few more, there's the field glasses actually up in that picture, the ones that have been away to the First World War. We also have some of his cameras and the slides and things. But this collection, it's not just about Sam. It's about Katie Glass from Rathlin Island. It's about Tom Black from McCosquin. And it's about countless people that Sam encountered in his life. And it's that completeness, it's that telling the stories of other people that make it so special. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about Sam and his collection, then I'm going to hand over to Grainne because I know we all want to hear her sing. So if you go to the next slide for me now, please. So who was Sam? He was born in Coleraine in 1878. He's best known as a folklorist and recognised for his Songs of the People series that ran in the Northern Constitution newspaper between 1923 and 1939. He worked as a pensions and excise officer, and he said, in my contact with the old, who have all now passed away, I had the rare privilege of sharing their folklore and their old songs. So in the photographs there, you can see him with his wife, Memi, who he married in 1914, and they had one daughter, Olive. So Sam's daughter, Olive, she told Gail Huntington, who was the editor of the Songs of the People book, that her father often took his fiddle or tin whistle with him whenever he was visiting people in the country to assess them for a pension. He'd play a tune and ask if they knew any of the old songs. Usually they did, and this is one of the ways he managed to obtain songs for his series. So Olive would have referred to Sam's tin whistle as a gadget. So he used it to find common ground with people he was visiting, and as such, he managed to preserve many songs that otherwise may have been lost. So if we go to the next slide, please. So I'm not going to talk too much about Songs of the People. I'm going to let Grainne kind of talk more about the series, but it is the largest series collected between that time. What's really special about it is that he was careful to record the words along with the music. He wanted these songs to be sang. And it captures and celebrates an important aspect of our cultural history. It includes over 850 songs contributed by members of the public and people that Sam met through his work. What I find really interesting is the notes at the top of the songs. So he was really careful to record where the songs came from. In his newspaper series, he would often put a song he was looking for, and he would ask people to send in their best version of this old song. I mean, he had songs sent from everywhere: New York, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. People that had emigrated from here would have sent him back songs, and he was always looking for the purest version of those songs. But if you go to the next slide for me, I just wanted to show this one example. So this lady is called Mrs. John Roe McNeil, and she was known locally as Maggie Archer. She lived in Glendon. And there's a copy of the letter you can see there in the collection, and she's thanking Sam for a kettle that he sent her. And this kettle was in return for 10 songs, which she gave to Sam. Now, if you're able to play the wee clip, this is Jack McBride, and he'll explain this better. This is in a Radio Ulster broadcast.
Jack McBride, Glenn's man and journalist, reveals how Sam Henry, with its innate knowledge and sympathy, could win so much music from his neighbours.
Sam asked me would I come with him to go around by Glendon, because it was a district he didn't think had been covered beforehand. We went up to this house, and I remember it was during the war, and things were sort of tight. And Sam went into the house and he asked this lady, would she mind telling him a few stories? And she said no. She would. So Sam was all delighted, and she made us tea. Anyway, she started to hum when she was, you know, the way over the fire and taking the crook out and all that and lifting the pot off. And she started to hum, and Sam's ears perked up. He says, "What is that? Do you know the words that?" "I do indeed," she said. "Every word of it. I mind it well. I got it from my granda." Well, Sam says, "Would you mind singing it for me?" "Aye, surely." And here Sam had the book out, and he's noting down all the time in tonic sol for the music. But at the finish, she says, "Do you know, sir, there's one thing I'm terribly annoyed about." "And what would that be?" says she. She imagine me giving you a tea made in an old black pot, she says, instead of a decent kettle. She says, "And I've been trying down in Cushendall, and there's nobody seems to have one at all, and even tried in Ballymena, and they hadn't any." Sam says, "Your problem solved." He says, "I have a brother-in-law in Coleraine, and if he hasn't got one, there's not one on the whole British Isles." So about a week or 10 days after that, Mrs. McNeil got a beautiful kettle. There wasn't a like it, she said, in the whole glen.
So I was really pleased when I discovered that little clip, because it just tells the story so nicely, and it's that interaction with Sam as well, and that he actually went out with Sam collecting these songs. I just think it's lovely. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see then just a couple of the songs that we found in the collection from Mrs. John Roe McNeil that Sam had typed up. And then if you go to the next slide for me, please. So as well as printing the series in the Northern Constitution, Sam shared his collection through radio broadcasts on BBC and Radio Éireann. So his first broadcast was actually in May 1925, and that was within the first year of broadcasting activity in Ireland. So his last known broadcast seems to have been about 1946. So in almost 20 years, he presented radio broadcasts on lots of different topics. Examples include Ulster's Heritage of Song series in 1935 and 37, the Undiscovered Ulster series in 1938, and the Adventures of a Song Hunter. His programme, Old Customs and Legends of Ulster, was broadcast to 200 radio stations in North America in 1937. And often during these broadcasts, he was accompanied by singers, including James McCafferty and Harriet Brownlow, and musicians such as fiddler James Keeley. So we go to the next slide. In 1906, he purchased his first camera, and we know this because we also have his 1906 diary, and he records receiving the camera, and he actually records at the very back of the diary, which you can see there, the very first photographs that he took and developed. So the photograph collection is really special as well. So over the next 50 years, he photographed people and places across this area, and it leaves behind an intriguing view of his world and the people that he met. So he captured people that he visited and worked with, his friends, as well as places across the region. Many of these would have featured in local newspapers, as well as the Derry and Antrim yearbooks, and even in some of the books that he published. So we've scanned in the collection over 3,000 photographs of negatives and glass slides and photographs. And some of those have details of who the people are and where the places are in the back and things like that are written on the top of the glass slides, but others don't. So if we go to the next slide, please. So this was one of the photographs, and it was just named Ballinamore Girl. So I'm going to talk a little bit later just about one of the projects that we did, but we shared the collection with some local groups in the area, and Maud Steele was part of one of these groups. And if you play the wee clip, she was able to fill in a lot of the blanks about this photograph and who this lady was.
Sam Henry, as you have heard before, was a keen photographer and also a historian who was interested in ordinary working people doing jobs which he had the foresight to photograph for his collection. He probably realised that many of these people and their activities were fast disappearing with no historical record and could easily be forgotten in the future. In his collection, there are a number of photos showing workers in the linen industry during the 1930s. Some of these appeared in a book, this one, called Rooms of Time by Cathal Dallat. My brother bought this one for me. One of these photographs was simply entitled Ballinamore Mill near Ballymoney around 1930s. In this photo was a pretty girl, a moment, frozen in time, posing for the camera in her bare feet, as the mill workers in the spinning department had to do in those days. She was standing in front of a very complicated-looking machine, wearing her work apron with a series of implements hanging from her waist, her pickers, as I later learned. These enabled her to do quite a dangerous job, joining up threads in the spinning process. Quite a stylish lady, in fact, for a factory worker. But who was this mystery girl? How could we find out? No name had been attached to the photograph. Now, I knew a lady who had worked in Ballinamore Mill at around that time, so I showed the picture to her, and guess what? She said, "That's me." What a surprise. At this time, this lady was in her 70s and had never seen this photo before, but she certainly remembered the day that it was taken. She told me that the mill owner and another man had come on a Sunday afternoon and asked if she would go down to the mill to have her photo taken in front of the machines that she normally operated. She said she didn't want to go by herself, so she took her friend Greta with her, but that the man only wanted to take her photo. So now we knew. Her name was Emily Anderson, or Sissy, as she was affectionately known, born on the 30th of November 1913, which was the year after the sinking of the Titanic and the year before the outbreak of the First World War. Historic times. She was one of 8 children. She had 4 sisters and 3 brothers, and at the age of 14 had started work in Ballinamore Mill, where some of her relatives already worked. There she worked hard and progressed to the position of doffing mistress. Times were hard and pay was low in those days, but she loved her work and enjoyed helping everybody. In her 20s, she met and married a man from Resharton, where they eventually settled and reared 8 children, 6 boys and 2 girls. As well as looking after her own family, she cooked and cleaned for her widowed father-in-law and did caretaking duties for the church. No oil-fired central heating in those days. Buckets of coal had to be carried in on Saturday nights and boilers lit early on Sunday mornings, regardless of rain, hail, sleet or snow. All this was done cheerfully and with a song on her lips. She had a lifelong love of music, having sung in several prize-winning choirs in her youth. She possessed a rich, strong, melodic voice and was often in demand to sing solos at weddings and other events. She could bring a tear to your eye with her soulful rendering of Oft in the Stilly Night or Nearer, My God, to Thee, which she always informed us was the last tune played on the Titanic as it sank. She was undoubtedly the best alto singer that they had ever had in Resharton Church Choir during the 40 years that she was a faithful member. As a hostess, she was superb. Everyone was made welcome in her house. Her generosity and helpfulness was well known to family, friends, and neighbours alike, all of whom would testify that she was a great wee woman. Sadly, she lost her husband in 1974 and her son in 1992, but she carried on bravely, playing a significant part in the upbringing of her 27 grandchildren and helping and supporting all the families in every possible way. In later years, when her health began to deteriorate, she still managed to attend family gatherings and weddings of her grandchildren. And here she is at 90, dressed, ready for a wedding, still a stylish lady. I'm sure Sam would still have found her an interesting subject for a photograph. And how do I know all this? Well, I am very proud to say she was my mother-in-law.
So I always like to share that when I'm doing a talk about Sam, because I think it just shows how important it is that we as a museum service share our collections and that we make them accessible, because otherwise we wouldn't have had any of this information other than Balnamore Mill Girl, you know, and that just adds so much more to our collection and what it preserves. So I am going to finish up, if you go to the next slide, and we'll get Grainne on. I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we actually do with the collection. So going back to when we first got it in 2010, the first thing we did was an exhibition in Coleraine Town Hall in 2011. 2014, we received some funding to do some documentation. So a big part of museum work that doesn't get seen is the documentation of a collection, because if you don't document it, you don't know what's in it and you can't share it or make it accessible. So it's a large part of what we do that kind of goes on behind the scenes. So that first little bit of funding allowed us to do that. After that, then we used it to inspire our Playful Museums programme, which is something we run every February with under fives. And you can see up the top, we actually had a Sam Henry teddy bear made, puppet, so he was very popular. And we shared some of the songs that were, that he collected, children's songs, playground songs, that kind of things with kids. The biggest project then we did was we got funding from the Esme Fairbairn Trust that was administrated by the Museums Association. And that allowed us to document the entire collection, which was a huge undertaking. It took somebody full-time about 3 years to document that full collection and to get it onto the NI Archive website. She catalogued over 8,000 items and she was meticulous. So the collection has been really well documented, which we're delighted about. But we also then took it out to different groups and we let groups get hands-on with the collection. They could tell us what they were interested in. We brought that stuff in for them to see. And then that inspired them to do different things. So we worked with a group on Rathlin that looked at his photographs and added information about the photographs. We produced a book. Cross and Passion, they made their own pinhole cameras and went out and photographed Ballycastle. And if you go to the next slide for me, please. Scad the Beggars did a concert in Ballymoney Town Hall with his music. And then Maud is pictured up in that middle picture at the back. So they all wrote different pieces and poetry and stuff inspired by the collection. And we also worked with a writers group that did something similar. We then finished with an exhibition in 2019 in Coleraine Town Hall, which has travelled to Ballymoney since and is to go to Limavady as well. So then that brings us kind of up to 2019. I went off maternity leave and then Grainne comes in 2020 to start her PhD. So I'm going to hand over to Grainne now.
Thank you. If we could just move on to the next slide, I think. So yes, thank you very much for the introduction. I wanted to talk a little bit about my PhD project, but I'm probably going to keep it shorter than planned. So yeah, I started the project in 2020 and I'm now sort of in that final writing up stage. So alongside my PhD, I'm always trying to incorporate some practical elements, and that comes from my background in music and studying music as an undergrad and for my master's, which is why my most recent sort of side project was to record an album of the songs from the archive into SCD, which was, as Joe mentioned, it was released back in July 2020 now. But the PhD project, the main aim of it really was to map and to analyse the significance of the sense of place that comes throughout the collection. And there were three main research aims: to identify the major themes that arise, to explore how the lyrics construct a sense of place and identity, and to trace how this can be mapped to the topography of the north of Ireland. So it's all linked to a lot of what we've talked about, or other people have talked about today. So my research, I'm mainly looking at the lyrics and the themes of the songs and what they might be able to tell us about the local places and the communities in which so many of the songs are based, or that they tell a story about. And you'll hear that as I sing some of the songs about Portrush later on. And this then relates to broader issues surrounding identity and culture in Northern Ireland, which has been at the focus of my work and research since I was an undergraduate. And I came up with the first sort of three initial areas to look at: place, nature, and language. So firstly, place, how this is conceptualized throughout the collection. So what I really mean is how the songs reveal the bonds between people and places. And this isn't always about specific locations, but sometimes particular features of the landscape, such as the sea being here, the coastal songs, how there's always much more reference to the seas and to how we feel being at the coastline. And likewise, how songs can be used to then create or evoke these feelings of belonging and attachment. And what I love about exploring this in the Sam Henry collection is how local it is to us and to where I grew up. And then the second theme is exploring the connection to nature in the words and lyrics. The strong use of nature imagery and ecological metaphors that are present throughout the songs. These are often referencing the rivers, the mountains, the trees, and the seas. Exploring this through the collection feeds into the sense of place as we think about our place within nature, sort of following on from a lot of what Joe said. It's something which is so relevant today in response to climate change and environmental issues, as folk songs can operate as guardians of ecological knowledge. And the third area then is language and the use of language throughout. Many of his songs were written in Ulster Scots, but there are also songs in Irish that he usually writes out phonetically. And all of this together in the collection reflects the complex and diverse song tradition that we have here from Scotland, England, and the rest of Ireland as well. The thistle, rose, and the shamrock. And ultimately, this is a key reason why the Sam Henry collection is considered a non-sectarian collection of song, as there are songs across various communities and cultural traditions in Northern Ireland. Next slide, please. So the album then, as mentioned, it was released last summer. And my intent for this really was to get these various unknown songs out there, but it also makes as a nice complement to my written PhD work. It brings the collection and everything to life a bit more. Many of the tunes, as you will hear, are very recognisable. However, the lyrics will never have been heard before. And the majority of these songs from my album are from the North Coast, and they were chosen to highlight how both the landscape and local stories, or tragedies in the case of the next example, how that can be reflected in folk song, revealing a unique sense of place for the people and the communities. So I'm going to sing one song now, a song about Portrush. It tells the story of a shipwreck tragedy that happened in 1826 in Portrush, where 4 fishermen sadly lost their lives. These words were written by a carpenter from Portstewart called Daniel McElreevy, but Henry noted it down from a man, William Sloane, in Coleraine. This was quite near the start of the series, around the late 1920s. So this shows how the story was kept alive over 100 years later through the song. So just bear with me while I set it up over here. This is the Portrush fishing disaster. soon the foaming ocean their bodies fair do lie. Around the town of sweet Portrush much pleasure they had seen. No more they'll roam the flowery hills where oft times they had been. Their sweethearts and their comrades dear, they bid them all adieu. 'Twas the raging seas and stormy waves that parted them. It was not for lack of courage or skill that they did not neglect. A hard squall of winds came on their boat, it did upset. The wind it blew tremendously, and high did run the waves, and soon the stormy ocean became their watery graves. Oh, had it pleased Jehovah, their bodies had been fine. Their parents had conveyed them safe to their own burial ground. It would have eased their troubled souls from sorrow, grief, and pain. But I hope they meet in heaven, where they'll never part again. If we could go to the next slide. So the songs from the series were published in solfa notation, though I think some choirs might still use it today, as I've heard from other talks I've given. This form of notation is not so accessible. So I went about adapting these songs really by just drawing out some sort of chords that could be used for accompaniment and then singing the tunes to that, or doing slight variations on the tunes that Sam Henry said a lot of the songs were based off. So for this one, it was Down by the Sally Gardens. So I'm going to talk a little bit more now just about place, the first theme, and then sing a couple of songs that relate to that. If we could go to the next slide. So a really prominent aspect of much of the Sam Henry collection is how the relationship to home or to Ireland is expressed throughout. And much of this is seen through songs of immigration, as it is within folk song culture more generally. And this highlights a sense of people's attachment to their homeland through expressing feelings of separation. And of course, Irish migrations, as we know, have been going on for centuries. And with that, song transmission is continuous. But one of the most significant migrations, which forms a huge role in Irish song balance, is of course the Irish famine of the 1840s. Its effects drastically impacted upon Ireland's political and cultural circumstances and entered folk memory for both the Irish-born and the Irish diaspora. And this has been mirrored in the famine experiences of Irish traditional music since. Songs of immigration often combine this sense of loss with hope and resilience, which resonates with Irish people all over the world. So this mirroring of sadness and hope can be seen in a vast number of songs of this nature through the collection, such as The Green Fields of America, the narrative shifts between the sadness of leaving Ireland and the hopes for new beginnings in a new country. You can see the lyrics on screen here. And these songs hold a place in Irish history as they retell stories about family, communities, and hardship. However, furthering this in the Sam Henry collection is the focus on this very local, as he recorded and collected variants of many immigration songs in particular localities around the Coleraine and Causeway Coast area. For example, the Green Hills of Antrim, which embodies much of the same themes of the green fields of America, but through a specific local context, as it references the leaving behind of Sweet Cushendall and the townland of Cushleek in County Antrim. It's almost as if how many local place names can you put into any one song? And this is also one of the songs I've recorded, so I'll just sing a bit for you now. This song, you'll definitely recognize the tune, and the lyrics are up here, so feel free to sing along. Oh, dark was the day when I sailed from Cushleek and crossed the wide ocean, my fortune to see. My heart's with the hills over my native land, and the trees that go wandering down to the strand. The place where I'm living, the mountains are high and lift their big heads far above to the sky, but they'll never compare with the old place to me, where the green hills of Antrim sweep down to the sea. The birds that I see here have plumage that's gay, and the fields are all bright with the blossoms of May. But a lark from the Carby be dearer than all, or the gorse that grows wild above Sweet Cushendall. The girls from this country are bonny and bright, the ways that they dress are a wonderful sight. But oh, for one glimpse of my Molly McCree, where the green hills of Antrim sweep down to the sea. Oh, dark was the day when I sailed from Cushleek and crossed the wide ocean, my fortune to see. My heart's with the hills over my native land, and the streams that go wandering down to the strand. The place where I'm living, the mountains are high and lift their big heads far above to the sky, but they'll never compare with the old place to me, where the green hills of Antrim sweep down to the sea. They'll never compare with the old place to me, where the green hills of Antrim sweep down to the sea. So much of Henry's collection follows this composition, its songs incorporating wider folk themes into very local settings, which suggests Henry was capturing an accurate depiction of the people's sense of place. And this also demonstrates how stories and histories that are very much peripheral can become more universal. So just briefly, nature, and as I spoke about before, nature imagery or objects are also reflected through the Sam Henry archive, often through the use of metaphors. Rivers are a prominent theme throughout the Songs of the People collection, and in folk song and poetry, rivers can symbolise a variety of concepts and feelings. Its flowing properties may present a progression over time as the river imagery takes the subject to a different place than at the beginning of the text. And as such, the river metaphor can demonstrate changes over time in various contexts. And this is something, again, relating it back to some of the stuff that Joe was talking about. We can think about that in terms of the changing landscapes around us, from urbanization or more contemporary climate change issues. And in the Sam Henry collection, the connection to the natural environment through these songs is so extensive. Numerous songs directly reference a nature object of a specific place. So the hills of Ballybully, of Donegal, of Tyrone. These are all examples of songs that are addressing the specific hills of an area. The lyrics of Slieve Gallenbrae are powerful in doing this, in creating a unique spot through the nature and landscape of that area. Then leave the city's smoky slums where want and care abide, and view the humble peasant homes along the mountainside, while free from care breathe God's pure air and hear the linnets lay, and see the hills and tiny rills around Slieve Gallenbrae. The lyrics represent the mountain as a peaceful place away from the city's smoky slums where one can unwind and breathe God's pure air. It makes various references to the nature in the surroundings, the birds singing, the flowers growing, the sun-kissed leaves on trees, and the cottage homes and the farms, all of which associate positive feelings of this scenic beauty and calm to that specific place. And these songs are really important now, or can play a really vital role now, as they can continue to be valuable tools in addressing climate change for a number of reasons. Firstly, for education and awareness, as the songs are an accessible and engaging means of in educating people about ecological issues. They can convey complex ideas about climate change, biodiversity, and conservation in a simple and relatable manner. They can also be used to inspire action for environmental causes. They evoke a sense of nostalgia and connection to nature, motivating individuals and communities to take steps to protect their environment. And finally, for cross-cultural exchange. Folk songs transcend borders and can facilitate cross-cultural exchange of specific ecological knowledge. By sharing these songs and their associated wisdom, communities around the world can learn from one another's experiences and adapt to changing environmental conditions together. As we face the challenges of global warming, these songs continue to be valuable resources for connecting people to their environment and motivating them to take action to protect it. I won't talk too much about this, but this is touching on what Joe talked about from my episode that featured in a previous season, where we were really talking about one of the songs from the collection, Sweet Falalay, which was collected from a man, Hugh Cassidy, in the Mahara area. And Henry's sort of methods of collecting also portray his connection to nature and his continuous engagement with the everyday life around him, the people, the communities, and the lands. He contacted other known poets, which was the case for Hugh Cassidy, or song collectors and performers. And by interacting with the people of townlands, he was able to get the name of a particular person. And this was the case for Hugh Cassidy, and he writes about that in an article in the Belfast Telegraph in April 1944. He recorded from Cassidy the song Sweet Falalay, a song which, like many of the collection, admires the nature and beauty of the scenery with the praise of the people of that area. And the words were written by Cassidy himself. So finally, the last theme was the language. The Ulster Scots representation that comes through the collection is quite a lot. And while I'm not an expert at all in Ulster Scots, I can recognise that many of the songs of the collection reveal elements of an Ulster Scots influence. So there's a few examples up there now. One of the songs, Merry 18, Sam collected from John Henry Macaulay of Ballycastle, who contributed at least 21 songs to the series. He was also a well-known fiddle player and songwriter. And in these verses, there are a few Ulster Scots words used, such as hey for have, ken for no. And then I'm going to put a few more examples on the screen just quickly. So there's another song, Kissing Ben the Room, which makes repeated use of the word Ben, meaning inside, and the song really wouldn't make sense if you didn't know what that word was. And there are also numerous other examples that come through in different ways, such as verses of more popular songs, some of Robbie Burns' songs that come through that he has sometimes put in or else written out alongside another variation. So seeming as it's Burns night tomorrow, I will just sing a snippet of that to try and have that sort of Ulster Scots influence coming through. A fond kiss and then we sever. A farewell that lasts forever. Deep in heart-wrung tears I'll pledge thee, warring sighs and groans I'll wedge thee. I'll nay blame my partial fancy, for nothing could resist my Nancy, but to see her was to love her, love but her, and love forever. Had we never, lo, said kindly, had we never, lo, said blindly, never met, nor never parted, we have never been broken hearted. A fond kiss and then we sever. A farewell lasts forever. Deep in hearts wrung tears I'll pledge thee, warring sighs and groans I'll wedge thee. Thank you. There were also a number of songs that were written in Irish Gaelic. However, as I mentioned, these were usually written out as heard and not as they would have been written. So I think really there can be difficult to see. I think like Irish language expert would need to analyse these songs. And just to end, here's a sort of visual representation then of how the project has developed from those first three aims to the main areas of place, nature and language, and then finally to the 5 sort of explorations. The first being the geography and that Sam Henry map, which also includes the people that we've mentioned, such as Hugh Cassidy, such as Mrs. McNeill, the story about the kettle, all of those form part of the map. And then the nature side, the eco-critical way of looking at it. And then the last 2 areas being the main thematic exploration. So 2 of the biggest ways or themes that are drawn out, one being immigration and the other being the representation of women, which I didn't get to talk about today. And then these 5 areas became a full thesis, which don't worry, I'm not going to talk about at all. So we'll just go on to the next bit. So finally, I just wanted to say, why is this all important and what impact does it have? And I'm not trying to get you to read my PhD thesis. In fact, it's probably better that you don't. But more generally, why is the Sam Henry collection so important? And there could be so many more projects that's done on this, as mine really focuses on the songs. But as Sarah mentioned, there are so many, you could do a whole project on the photographs as well. But to me, it is important for 2 key reasons. At a time when the notion of identity in Northern Ireland is a constant and reevaluating issue, and the concerns of cultural conflicts can be on the rise, it is important to highlight this cross-cultural fluidity of traditions throughout the region. There is much richness to the dialect and language across Northern Ireland, which the lyrics of the songs of the people so powerfully illustrate. Additionally, the closeness between multiple elements of these languages essentially demonstrates how closely related the traditions throughout our region are. The Sam Henry folk songs can remind us of how culture and traditions in Northern Ireland are so clearly blended, not divided. And finally, as we face the biggest climate crisis of our time, the embodiment of nature and the use of symbolism through the Sam Henry songs can encourage the evaluation of our place within our natural surroundings. It enables the thinking of the impact we have on the environment directly around us, with a particular emphasis throughout these songs on the specific places of Northern Ireland's landscape. This notion can be furthered, and it too forms part of these discussions surrounding the sense of place. The hills, the seas, the rivers, and the mountains, they are all part of the musical culture, as nature becomes culture when people interact with it. So just to conclude, and I'm going to sing one more song, a song about Portrush after this, but to conclude the sort of presentation here, Sam Henry's unwavering commitment to the exploration, documentation, and preservation of our local cultural tradition and narratives is unmistakable. His deep-rooted connection with the community and his exceptional ability to engage with people and the public resonate strongly throughout his life's work. It is great to see the Sam Henry songs being recognised more through various community engagements like this. And although my research merely scratches the surface of something with the potential to have a profound impact, I am optimistic about the future. Sam Henry never got to live to see his life work published in books or music as he so desired. So now I hope to see this happening more and more in his memory. Thank you. So the last song I'll sing now is a song about Portrush. I've never sang it live before, so you're hearing it for the first time. And I thought this song, it works as a really nice example of how all the things that we've all talked about today are actually connected, and how you can view it in any one song. As there's a really strong connection to the nature, to the ocean that comes through, as well as to the people, where it almost embodies the nature as a character of itself. And that's really talking about what Joe was talking about, the heart and the soul. And as well as this, there's this sense of loss that comes through a lot of songs, in whatever way you want to look at it. So the loss of the land through immigration, through leaving, or through climate change, or really just the loss of the people that are there at different times, and how they make up part of the culture and the identity that you have. So on that note, as Joe mentioned, I would like to dedicate this song to my dad, who I lost 3 months ago. And without him, I really wouldn't be here, because he not only introduced me to the Sam Henry collection, but folk music more generally. He got me really interested in when I was younger and just wanted to sing like High School Musical or whatever. He was like, no, sing folk songs. And as well, he was an academic in the field of media studies, so he really got me to think in that similar way to music, to think about how it plays such a vital role in the history, the culture, and the heritage, especially something as local as this. So yes, I will now dedicate this song to him. Just going to take a drink of water first. Been talking so much. This is Bonnie Portrush. Oh, Bonnie Portrush, you shine where you stand. The more I think of you, the more my heart warms. Where I
more proudly rise like a ship on the sea, while the isles of the Skerries away in the lee, the sun and the sea bring blessings to all, as round thy bright borders we follow along. One day on the links, kind fate came to me, her eyes lit with love and as blue as the sea, her hair like the gold of your beautiful shore. So now and forever, my girl I adore. Oh, bonny Portrush, I will ever be blind to the hills that we see, where hearties I find. You brought me all blessings that life has in store. So good luck and goodbye to your wave-beaten shore. Thank you very much.
That's a really hard act to follow. Thank you so much, Grania and Sarah, for your wonderful talks this evening. The comments about your connection to your culture, to your song, to your history, to your nature is so important for all of us, and the contributions tonight have really reminded us of how important that is. We also have the wonderful Hugh McGrattan here, and his book is for sale. You know, he knows more about Portrush than any person should, and you know, we have that book which connects us all to Portrush as well, which is available for you to buy on the way out the door. We also have a very special gift for everyone this evening, also connecting us to the nature and our history. The Royal Portrush Golf Club with the Royal and Ancient produced this wonderful book. Many of you may have seen it in passing. It takes you through a whole year of Portrush with all of the flora, fauna, all wonderful photographs, excellent information, and there's one for everybody as you get out the door today. So please enjoy that. This book was made in 2019, and it takes you through a whole year and gives you such an insight into the Royal Portrush golf courses and how the links team work in harmony with nature to give balance to our natural ecosystems and the game of golf. So please enjoy that copy that you can take home with you this evening. And once again, can I just thank our wonderful speakers this evening.